Hello, and welcome to today's reading vlog. This is a different format, but I wanted to try something new actually. So, yeah, we continue with our book Revolutionary Road, chapter 4. Chapter 3 ended on a note of really like an expression from Frank Wheeler, extreme, what do we call it, frustration, and also very over an overarching theme, yes, of how important his masculinity is to him, you know, and how he's very conscious of it every turn, every moment he's awake. He constantly like bites his knuckles, but biting his knuckles also reminds him of how, as like all through growing up, he had this issue with his father, and how his father's hands look much manlier than his. How his father's hand looks like um just the epitome of masculinity. Meanwhile, his doesn't measure up to his father, but at least he looks okay. And then he has a son, and his son, he's constantly shaming his son, taking out his frustration on his son, as we see through this chapter. Like, it's a regular occurrence, not a surprising thing, because even after screaming at his son and um wrongfully assigning frustration, like the source of his frustration, to his kids, especially his son, he thinks of running after them and apologize. But it's also something very constant with Frank. He thinks of things that he could do to make his actions better, but he never does them, or he tries to do them when it doesn't matter anymore. And then somehow he forgets and starts to um I think in his head he feels like he just the thought of it alone means that he has actually done it. So since he has done it, there's no need for him to be accountable the next time it pops up, because the last time at least he wanted to do better or something. I feel like that's where we are. And that's how the chapter ends. The children running to meet their mother for comfort while he's far away, you know, doing his futile man job, which he still fails at, because at the end of the day, he has to call professional help, but he doesn't want to call professional help, I feel like, because that's also one thing. He's not self-aware of how really hurtful and harmful his behaviors and motivations are, you know. So let's just get into chapter 4. Then it was Sunday, with the living room deep in the rustling torpor of Sunday newspapers, and no words had been passed between Frank Wheeler and his wife for what seemed a year. She had gone alone to the second and final performance of the Petrified Forest, and afterwards had slept on the sofa again. He was trying now to take his ease in an armchair, looking through the magazine section of the Times while the children played quietly in the corner, and April washed the dishes in the kitchen. He had thumbed through the magazine more than once, put it down, and picked it up again. And he kept returning to a full page, dramatically lighted fashion photograph whose caption began, "A frankly flattering, definitely feminine dress to go happily wherever you go," and whose subject was a tall, proud girl with deeper breasts and hips than he had thought fashion models were supposed to have. At first, he thought she looked not unlike a girl in his office named Maureen Grube. Then he decided this one was much better looking and probably more intelligent. Still, there was a distinct resemblance, and as he studied this frankly flattering, definitely feminine girl, his mind slid away in a fuddled, erotic reverie. At the last office Christmas party, not nearly as drunk as he was pretending to be, he had backed Maureen Group up against a filing cabinet and kissed her long and hard on the mouth. Displeased with himself, he dropped the paper on the rug and lit a cigarette without noticing that another one, quite long, was smouldering in the ashtray beside him. Then, if only because the afternoon was bright and the children were quiet, and the fight with April was now another day in the past, he went into the kitchen and took hold of both her elbows as she bent over a sink full of suds. Listen, he whispered. I don't care who's right or who's wrong or what this whole damn thing is all about. Couldn't we just cut it out and start acting like human beings for a change? Until the next time, you mean? Make everything all nice and comfy cozy until the next time? I'm afraid not, thanks. I'm tired of playing that game. Don't you see how unfair you are being? What do you want from me? Two things at the moment. I want you to take your hands off me and I want you to keep your voice down. Will you tell me one thing? Will you tell me just what the hell you are trying to do? Certainly. I'm trying to wash the dishes. Daddy, Jennifer said Jennifer said when he went back to the living room. What? Would you please read us the funnies? The shyness of this request and the sight of their trusting eyes made him want to weep. You bet I will, he said. Let's sit down over here, all three of us, and we'll read the funnies. He found it hard to keep his voice from thickening into a sentimental husk as he began to read aloud. With their two heads pressed close to his ribs on either side, and their thin legs lying straight out on the sofa cushions, warm against his own. They knew what forgiveness was. They were willing to take him for better or worse. They loved him. Why couldn't April realize how simple and necessary it was to love? Why did she have to complicate everything? The only trouble was that the funnies seemed to go on forever. The turning of each dense, muddled page of them brought the job no nearer to completion. Before long, his voice had become a strained, hurrying monotone, and his right knee began a jiggle in a little dance of irritation. Daddy, we skipped a funny. No, we didn't, sweetie. That's just an advertisement. You don't want to read that. Yes, I do. I do too. But it isn't a funny. It just made to look like one. It's an advertisement for some kind of toothpaste. Read us it anyway. He set his bite. All the nerves at the root of his teeth seemed to have entwined with the nerves at the root of his scalp in a tingling knot. All right, he said. See, in the first picture, this lady wants to dance with this man, but he won't ask her to. And here in the next picture, she's crying, and her friend says maybe the reason he won't dance with her is because her breath doesn't smell too nice. And then in the next picture, she's talking to this dentist, and he says, dot dot dot. He felt as if he was sinking helplessly into the cushions and the papers and the bodies of his children like a man in quicksand. When the funnies were finished at last, he struggled to his feet, quietly gasping, and stood for several minutes in the middle of the carpet, making tight fists in his pocket to restrain himself from doing what suddenly seemed the only thing in the world he really and truly wanted to do, picking up a chair and throwing it through the picture window. What the hell kind of a life was this? What in God's name was the point or the meaning or the purpose of a life like this? So, notable phrase. What the hell kind of a life was this? What in God's name was the point or the meaning or the purpose of a life like this? So, yeah, like that. When evening came, heavy with beer, he began to look forward to the fact that the Campbells were coming over. Ordinarily, it might have depressed him. Why don't we ever see anyone else? Do you realize they are practically the only friends we have? But tonight it held a certain promise. At least she would have to laugh and talk in their company. At least she would have to smile at him from time to time and call him darling. Besides, it couldn't be denied that the Campbells did seem to bring out the best in both of them. Hi, they called to one another. Hi, hi. This one glad syllable borne up through the gathering twilight and redoubling back from the Wheeler's kitchen door was a traditional herald of an evening's entertainment. Then came the handshakings, the stately puckered kissings, the sighs of amiable exhaustion. Ah, woo, suggesting that miles of hot sand had been traveled for the finding of this oasis, or that living breath itself had been held painfully against the promise of this release. In the living room, having sipped and grimaced at the first frosty brimming of their drinks, they pulled themselves together for a moment of mutual admiration. Then they sank into various postures of controlled collapse. Millie Campbell dropped her shoes and squirmed deep into the sofa cushions, her ankles snug beneath her buttocks and her uplifted face crinkling into a good sport smile. Not the prettiest girl in the world, maybe, but cute and quick and fun to have around. Beside her, Frank slid down on the nape of his spine until his cocked leg was as high as his head. His eyes were already alert for conversational openings, and his thin mouth already moving in the curly shape of wheat, as if he were rolling a small bitter lozenge on his tongue. Shep, massive and dependable, a steadying influence on the group, set his meaty knees wide apart and worked his thigh loose with muscular fingers to free his throat for gusts of laughter. And finally, the last to settle, April arranged herself with careless elegance in the sling chair, her hair thrown back on the canvas to blow sad aristocratic spires of cigarette smoke at the ceiling. They were ready to begin. At first, it seemed to everyone's surprise and relief that the delicate topic of the laurel players could be rapidly disposed of. A brief exchange of words and a few deprecating, head shaking chuckles seemed to take care of it. Millie insisted that the second performance had really been much better than the first. I mean, at least the audience did seem more appreciative, I thought. Didn't you, sweetie? Shep said that Shep said that he personally was glad to have the damn thing over with. And April, to whom all their anxious glances now turned, put them at ease with a smile. To coin a phrase, she said, it was a lot of fun anyway. Wasn't it awful how many people were saying that last night? I must have heard those same words 50 times. Within a minute, the talk had turned to children and disease. The Campbell's eldest boy was underweight, and Millie wondered if he might be suffering from an obscure blood ailment. Until Shep said that whatever he was suffering from, it sure hadn't weakened his throwing arm. And from there to an agreement that the elementary school was really doing a fine job considering the reactionary board it was saddled with. And from there to the fact that prices had been unaccountably high in the supermarket. It was only then, during a dissertation by Millie on lamb chops, that an almost palpable discomfort settled over the room. They shifted in their seats, they filled awkward pauses with elaborate courtesies about the freshening of drinks. They avoided one another's eyes and did their best to avoid the alarming, indisputable knowledge that they had nothing to talk about. It was a new experience. 2 years or even a year ago, it could never have happened. For then, if nothing else, there had always been a topic in the outrageous state of the nation. How do you like this Oppenheimer business? Okay, interesting. I guess that was the time period of like where this book was certain, where the story was certain. One of them would demand, and the others would fight for the flogged revolutionary zeal. The cancerous growth of Senator McCarthy had poisoned the United States, and with the pouring of second or third drinks, they could begin to see themselves as members of an embattled, dwindling intellectual underground. Clippings from the Observer or Manchester Guardian would be produced and read aloud to slow and respectful nods. Frank might talk wistfully of Europe. God, I wish we had taken off and gone there when we had the chance. And this might lead to a quick general lust for expatriation. Let's all go. Once it went as far, I think this word I need to check it out. Expatriation. Kind of remind me of that word expat. Probably means the same thing, I guess. My glasses are crooked, so sometimes they just rest on one side of my nostrils. Let's all go. Once it went as far as a practical discussion of how much they would need for boat fare and rent and schools, until Shep, after a sobering round of coffee, explained what he had read about the difficulty of getting jobs in foreign countries. And even after politics had palled, there has still been the elusive but endlessly absorbing subject of conformity, or the suburbs, or Madison Avenue, or American society today. Oh Jesus, Shep might begin. You know this character next door to us, Donaldson, the one that's always out fooling with his power move and talking about the rat race and the soft cell. Well, listen, did I tell you what they said about his barbecue pit? And there we follow an anecdote of extreme suburban smugness that left them weak with laughter. Oh, I don't believe it, April would insist. Do they really talk that way? And Frank would develop the theme. The point is, it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't so typical. It isn't only the Donaldsons, it's the Crummers too, and the what do you call it, the Wingate, and a million others. It's all the idiots I ride with on the train every day. It's a disease. Nobody thinks or feels or cares anymore. Nobody gets excited or believes in anything except their own comfortable little goddamn mediocrity. Billy Campbell would writhe in pleasure. Oh, that's so true. Isn't that true, darling? They would all agree. And the happy implication was that they alone, the four of them, were painfully alive in a drugged and dying culture. It was in the face of this defiance and in tentative reply to this loneliness that the idea of the Laurel players had made its first appeal. Millie had brought the news. Some people she had met from the other side of the hill were trying to organize a theater group. They planned to hire a New York director and to produce serious plays if only they could arouse enough community interest. Oh, it probably wouldn't amount to much, Millie knew that, but she wondered, shyly, if it might not be fun. April had been disdainful at first. Oh God, I know these damn little artsy crafty things. There'll be a woman with blue hair and wooden beads who met Max Reinhardt once, and there'll be two or three slightly homosexual young men and seven girls with bad complexions. But then the tasteful advertisement began to appear in the local paper. We are looking for actors. Then the Wheelers met the people too, at an otherwise boring party, and had to admit that they were what April called genuine. At Christmas time, they met the director himself and agreed with Shep that he did seem like a man who knew what he was doing. And within a month, they were all committed. Even Frank, while refusing to try out for a part at the Lousy, helped write some of the promotional material and got it multigraphed at his office. And it was Frank who talked most hopefully about the larger social and philosophical possibilities of the thing. If a really good, really serious community theater could be established here, wouldn't it be a step in the right direction? God knew they would probably never inspire the Donaldsons, and who cared? But at least they might give the Donaldsons pause. They might show the Donaldsons a way of life beyond the commuting train and the Republican Party and the barbecue pit. Besides, what did they have to lose? Whatever it was, they had lost it now. Blame for the failure of the Laurel players could hardly be fobbed off on conformity or the suburbs or American society today. How could new jokes be told about their neighbors when these very neighbors had sat and sweated in their audience? Donaldsons, Kramers, Wingates, and all. They had come to the petrified forest with a surprisingly generous openness of mind and had been let down. Millie was talking about gardening now, about the difficulty of raising a healthy lawn on Revolutionary Hill, and her eyes were taking on a glaze of panic. Her voice had been the only sound in the room for 10 minutes or more, and it had been continuous. She seemed keenly aware of this, but aware too that if she allowed herself to stop, the house would fill with a silence as thick as water, an impossibly deep, wide pool in which she would flounder and drown. It was Frank who came to her rescue. Oh, hey, listen, Millie. I meant to ask you, do you know what sicham is? Or bicham? A kind of plant. Sicham, she repeated, pretending to think, while a blush of, oh, how do people cope with this thing? While a blush of gratitude suffused her softening face. Suffused is such a lovely word. I used it in my last thumbnail. Offhand, I'm afraid I don't know, Frank. I can certainly look it up for you, though. We have this book at home. Doesn't really matter, I guess, he said. It's just that Mrs. Givens came barrel assing over here yesterday with a big box of this crazy. Mrs. Givens! Millie cried in a sudden ecstasy of remembrance and relief. Oh my goodness, I haven't even told you people about that. I guess I haven't even told Shep yet. Have I, sweetie? About their son? It's fantastic. She was off again, but this was a wholly different kind of monologue. Everyone was listening. The urgency of her voice and the eager way she leaned forward to tuck her skirts down over her wrinkled knees had galvanized them all with the promise of a new theme. Amelie savored the capture of her audience, wanting to let the revelation come out as slowly as possible. First of all, the Wheelers know the Givenses had a son. Certainly they did, and Millie sat nodding wisely, allowing herself to be interrupted, while they reminded each other of the thin sailor whose photograph had grinned from the Givensons' mantelpiece the one time they had gone there for dinner. They remembered Mrs. Givens explained that this was John, who had loathed the Navy, had done marvelously well at MIT, and now was doing marvelously well as an instructor of mathematics at some Western university. Well, Millie said, he isn't teaching any mathematics now, and he isn't out west either. You know where he is? You know where he's been for the past 2 months? He's over here in Green Acres. She added, when they all looked blank. The state hospital, the insane asylum. They all began chattering at once, drawing close and tense together in the fog of cigarette smoke. It was almost like old times. Wasn't this the damnedest, weirdest, saddest thing? Was Millie absolutely certain of her facts? Oh yes, she was certain. And what's more, she went on, he didn't just go to Green Acres. He was taken in and put there by the state police. A Mrs. Macready, who worked for the Givenses as a part-time cleaning woman, had told me the whole story only yesterday at the shopping center, unable to believe she hadn't heard it long before. She said she thought everybody had heard it by now. Anyway, it seems he's been, mentally disturbed for a long time. She said they practically went broke trying to pay for this private sanitarium out in California. He would go in there for months at a time and then come out. That's when he'll teach, I guess, and then go back again. Then he seemed alright for a long time until suddenly he quit his job out there and disappeared. Then he turned up here without any warning and came storming into the house and sort of held them captive there for about 3 days. She giggled uneasily at this, aware that a phrase like held them captive might sound too melodramatic to be true. That's what Mrs. Macready called it anyway. I mean, he probably didn't have a gun or a knife or anything, but he must have scared them half to death, especially with Mr. Givens being so old and all and his heart struggle. What he did was, he locked them in and cut the telephone wires and said he wasn't going to leave until they gave him what he had come for. Only he wouldn't say what it was he had come for. One time he said it was his birth certificate, and they looked through all their old papers and stuff until they found it and gave it to him, and he tore it up. The rest of the time, he just walked around talking and talking, raving, I guess, and breaking things, furniture, pictures of the wall, dishes, everything. And in the middle of it all, Mrs. Macready came over to go to work, and he locked her in too. That's how she found out, you see. And I guess she was there for about 10 hours before she got out to the garage. Then she called the state troopers and they came and took him to Green Acres. God, April said, the state troopers, how awful. And they all shook their heads in solemn agreement. Shep was inclined to doubt the cleaning woman's veracity. After all, the whole thing is just hearsay. But the others talked him down. Hearsay or not, it had the unmistakable ring of truth to it. April pointed how significant it now seemed that Mrs. Gibbons had been dropping in so often lately for seemingly aimless little visits. It's the funniest thing. I've always had the feeling she wanted something here or wanted to tell us something and couldn't quite get the words out. Haven't you felt that? Here she turned to her husband, but without quite meeting his eyes and without adding the darling or even the frank that would have filled his heart with hope. He muttered that he guessed he had. God, isn't that sad? April said. She's probably been dying to talk about it or to find out how much we know or something. Millie, happily relaxing, wanted to explore the thing from the woman's angle. What would a mother feel on learning that her only child was mentally deranged? Shep hitched his chair up close to Frank, excluding the girls, bent on a plain, hard-headed discussion of the practical aspect. What was the deal? Could a man be forcibly committed to the North House just like that? Didn't it sound fishy somehow from a legal standpoint? Frank began to see that if he allowed things to go on this way, The excitement of the topic would soon be dispelled. Without it, the evening might then degenerate into the dreariest kind of suburban time filler, the very kind of evening he had always imagined the Donaldsons and the Wingate and the Kramers having, in which women consulted with women about recipes and clothes, while men settled down with men to talk of jobs and cars. In a minute, Shep might even say, "How's the job going, Frank?" in dead earnest, just as if Frank hadn't made it clear time and again that his job was the very least important part of his life, never to be mentioned except in irony. It was time to act. He took a deep drink, leaned forward, and raised his voice enough to leave no doubt of his intention to address the group. Wasn't this, he asked, a beautifully typical story of these times and this place? A man could rant and smash and grapple with the state police, and still the sprinklers whirled at dusk on every lawn and television droned in every living room. A woman's only son came home insane, confronting her with God only knew what agonies of grief and guilt. And still she busied herself with the doings of the zoning board, with little cherubs of neighborly good cheer and cardboard boxes full of garden plants. I mean, talk about decadence, he declared. How decadent can a society get? Look at it this way. This country is probably the psychiatric, psychoanalytical capital of the world. Old Freud himself could never have dreamed up a more devoted bunch of disciples than the population of the United States. Isn't that right? Our whole damn culture is geared to it. It's the new religion. It's everybody's intellectual and spiritual sugar teeth. And for all that, look what happens when a man really does blow his top. Call the troopers, get him out of sight quick, hustle him off, and lock him up before he wakes the neighbors. Christ's sake, when it comes to any kind of a showdown, we're still in the Middle Ages. It's as if everybody had made this tacit agreement to live in a state of total self-deception. The hell with reality. Let's have a whole bunch of cute little winding roads and cute little houses painted white and pink and baby blue. Let's all be good consumers and have a lot of togetherness and bring our children up in a bath of sentimentality. Dad is a great man because he makes a living. Mom is a great man because she's stuck by daddy all these years. And if old reality ever does pop out and say boo, we'll all get busy and pretend it never happened. It was the kind of outburst that normally won their clamorous approval or at the very least caused Millie to cry, "Oh, that's so true." But it seemed to have no effect. The three of them sat watching politely while he talked. And when he stopped, they looked mildly relieved, like pupils at the end of a lecture. So, it's just stupid, like, oh God. Let's continue, sorry. There was nothing for him to do but get up and collect the glasses and retreat to the kitchen, where he petulantly watched, where he petulantly wrenched and banged at the ice tray. The black kitchen window gave him a vivid reflection of his face, round and full of weakness, and he stared at it with loathing. That was when he remembered something, and the thought seemed to follow rather than precede the stricken look it caused on his mirrored mind. Something that shocked him and then filled him with a sense of ironic justice. The face in the glass, again, seeming to anticipate rather than reflect his mood, had changed now from a look of dismay to a wise and bitter smile, and it nodded at him several times. Then he busied himself with the drinks, anxious to get back to the company. The thing he had remembered, whatever else it might mean, would be something to talk about. "I just thought of something," he announced, and they all looked up. "Tomorrow's my birthday." "Well," the Campbell said in tired congratulation. Oh, my mouth. The Campbell said in tired congratulatory unison, "I'll be 30 years old. Can you beat that?" "Hell yes, I can beat it," said Shep, who was 32, and Millie, who was 34, began brushing cigarette ashes off her lap. "No, but I mean, it's funny to think you're not in your 20s anymore," he said, re-establishing himself on the sofa. "It's kind of, the end of an era or something." Okay, this is literally TikTok speak. Or just social media in general, sha. I don't know. He was getting drunk. He was drunk already. In another minute, he'll be saying even sillier things than this and repeating himself. He knew that, and the desperation of knowing it made him talk all the more. Birthdays, he was saying. It's funny how they all run together when you look back. I do remember one of them damn well, though, and that was my 20th. And he began to tell them how he had spent it, or part of it, pinned down by mortar and machine gun fire in the last week of the war. One small, cold, sober part of his mind knew why he was doing this. It was because humorous talk of the army and the war had more than once turned out to be the final salvation of evenings with the Campbells. There was nothing Shep seemed to relish more, and though the girls might laugh in the wrong places and jokingly insist that they would never fathom the interest and loyalties of men, there was no denying that their listening faces would shine with a glow of romance. One of the most memorable nights of the whole friendship, in fact, had been built on a series of well-told army stories and had found its climax in a roar of masculine song. Shep Campbell and Frank Wheeler, exultantly laughing and sweating and bathed in the sleepy admiration of their wives, had thumped their fists in matching cadence on the coffee table and bellowed out at 3 in the morning, "Oh ho, hidey tidy, Christ Almighty, who the hell are we? Flim flam, goddamn, we're the infantry." And so he told his anecdote as carefully and well as he could, using all the tricks of wry self disparagement that had come to form his style of military reminiscence over the years. It wasn't until he got to the part that went, "So I poked the guy next to me and said, 'Hey, what day is this?' that he began to feel uneasy. And by then it was too late. There was nothing to do but finish it. And it turned out to be my birthday. He knew now that he had told the same story to the Campbells before using almost the same words. It must have been a year ago that he had told it in connection with his turning 29. Both the Campbells made conscientious little clocks of amusement, and Shep discreetly inspected his watch. But the worst part of the whole weekend, if not of his life to date, was the way April was looking at him. He had never seen such a stare of pitying boredom in her eyes. It haunted him all night while he slept alone. He was still there in the morning when he swallowed his coffee and backed down the driveway in the crumpled old Ford he used for a station car. And riding to work, one of the youngest and healthiest passengers on the train, he sat with the look of a man condemned to a very slow, painless death. He felt middle-aged. Oh, this chapter is actually shorter than past three chapters, and yeah, I think this chapter is what I'll call the comedy chapter. And like I was laughing so deeply because I don't read it on my own personal time. Yeah, I have other books I'm reading. I'm currently reading for the month of August. I'm reading um Diary of a Mad Housewife. What is it? And I'm also doing a review for Liar's Diary. So like I'm reading other things. This Diary of a Mad Housewife. So I'm reading other things, So I don't want to. I feel like the enjoyment of these videos for me would be like surprising myself with what I see here. So as excited as I am to like continue this chapter was actually very um self like it was satisfying because like first of all you get some kind of, what do you call this, you get Frank, in this chapter got lashed, by his own self self-reflection. Yes, it was not like an intentional reflection of himself, but like that thing that mattered the most to him, his appearance, his image, to the outside world, to people, to his neighbors, to his friends, to his, not so much to his, yes, to his wife, to a large extent, that thing was completely demolished in today's chapter. And I think it's also very interesting that the birthday, at the end of the day, like the next day or when, yeah, the birthday eventually was like a knock on his head, for him turning 30, which is very, it's like existential crisis. But I wouldn't call Frank having this like the existential crisis you have and you get into your self-awareness. I feel like Frank is just in a state of crisis, But like his own crisis, other people suffer for it. You get, it's something that you're supposed to reflect on and, I don't know, do better, not do better, but make your life much easier. But everything Frank does just makes his life harder. I don't know if I'm making sense, but either way, I'm satisfied with this chapter because I'm satisfied with all chapters, but story wise, in the sense of like I'm following these people, I'm looking at their lives, these characters' lives. I'm satisfied that Frank got his lashings today, and from people that are very close to him. It's interesting that he was like, he doesn't know that, like, I think something he doesn't realize is that after a while, when people get close to you, they don't really, it's not about like what you do anymore. They just like you as a person, or they see you as a person, and the things that they see, from your person, from your person, yeah, the things they see when they look at you, you know when they perceive you, is what makes them stick around and all that. But I think, since he's very blind to the way his actions affect those around him, um yes, I think the way he's blind to how April is obviously very mad at him, I feel like he wouldn't even recognize that the Campbells probably sensed the friction between both of them. You get, and sensing the friction between both of them, like maybe not very large, like large sensation of the friction, but maybe like just a little bit to be in the air. But Frank feeling like each child would, what would he say? He would try to act as if, like everything is fine, everything is like, it's a new day, it's a new visit. But like, it's not just new visits. These visits are predicated on past enjoyment of said visit. You get, so that's why they are coming. You get, so like now, for you to know that he doesn't even pay attention so much, is the fact that he's repeating this same story that he has said with the same words on the same occasion of him turning 29. So it's like, if it has become clear that this is now a performance for him. It's not like that moment when he was telling the story for the first time, and they would be so enraptured, like, by such a perspective into his mind, or what he thinks of himself, or how he views life. They would be so like engrossed in the newness of it, in the what do you call it, humanness of it. But for him to now do it again, the same, like everything was the same, doing it again, I'm sure they just came to this awareness that, oh, maybe this guy is kind of kind of pretentious, or he's stuck in his own head or something like that. And it's obvious that he looks down on the Sheps, like he looks down on the Campbells too. It's obvious. It's also funny. One thing I want to notice is how he was like bringing up the kids, forgiving him, without thinking about, which is what kids do. They will always go back to you, like, ask. So him, like, propping them up in his mind against April's holding of the grudge, and not letting things be back to normal in his own way. Um, and then like, he has barely gotten into the story that he's reading for them, and he's already frustrated by them again. He's already irritated by them. He doesn't want to be there. So I was just thinking about it, like when he was saying things like, what was he doing with his life? He wants to throw a chair at the window. Like, what was the goddamn purpose of reading stories to his children? you know I was just thinking that, is the problem the kids, or is the problem his wife? Is the problem he's married? Like, in that moment when I was reading it, and I realized that no, the problem is not anything outside of Frank. The problem is Frank himself, and the problem will continue to persist with somebody like Frank, because he doesn't learn, he doesn't take account, he doesn't pay attention to things. He pretends like he's only concerned about, he's only like, he's very self-centered. He's very self-centered, and it's different from the idea of, oh, let me be self-aware, to improve my relationship with other people. His own self, he feels like as if he's giving me the energy of someone that thinks the world owes him something. And I don't know how he came about that, because his beginnings were very humble, and his father, really spent a lot of time inadvertently humiliating him. And so, like, having all of those things, I don't know where the energy of the world owes him. I don't know. What do you call this thing that is like fame, but it's not fame for people that want to be acknowledged everywhere, like they want to be propped up as some kind of important whatever. So I'm just rambling about the chapter because it was so funny. It was a very sweet chapter, short and sweet. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.